has been smashed or doesn't exist. There's a plan to invest and make arms production facilities in Ukraine, but those don't exist yet. And without this money in the short term, American experts, military experts were doing an assessment in the last week, and they said within a few weeks of January that Ukraine will start to run out of long-range missiles. And then within a month or two, it'll run out of ammunition for its air defense. And that's key because Russia's expected to target the power and heating facilities during those coldest months of the year. And eventually by summer, it'll run out of artillery shells. And the artillery shells are the workhorse of this conflict. And without those, then Ukraine will be forced into a situation where it may have to capitulate.
All right, I've been talking to Ben Aries, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews. Ben, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Now shifting focus to Russia. As the political stage sets for the upcoming elections in March, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared a bold vision for his nation's future. Speaking at a conference of the ruling United Russia Party, Putin asserted his commitment to making Russia sovereign and self-sufficient. In his first campaign speech, he accused Western powers of attempting to disrupt Russia's economic and political stability, and this as he seeks to extend his rule until at least 2030, which would be only possible if he wins the March polls.
Я приветствую делегатов и гостей 21-го съезда «Важна». Мы вместе преодолевали испытания крупнейшей ведущей политической партии. Такой авторитет, а значит, все второстепенное, лишнее, то, что нас разъединяет в интересах нашей единой страны, нашего великого. И благодарю вас за поддержку. Спасибо большое.
Vladimir Putin is set to pursue a fifth term in the Kremlin as independent candidate with no real opposition to take his place. He's also received unanimous support from various leaders of his party, and this includes the Russian Prime Minister along with other top officials.
Сомнений в том, кто должен стоять во главе российского государства в этот весьма сложный период. За кем историческая правда, справедливость и поддержка большинства. В марте 2024 года наша партия сделает все, чтобы безоговорочную победу снова одержал действующий президент России Владимир Владимирович Путин.
Earlier on Saturday, a group of over 700 politicians, sports and cultural figures met in Moscow, showcasing their support for Putin. They advocated for his independent candidacy. And now, as per reports, Putin is not representing a party in the upcoming polls, even though he has its full support. On the other hand, the 2024 vote is expected to take place amid a huge crackdown on disagreement in Russia. Putin's main political opponent, Alexei Navalny, is currently serving a 19-year prison sentence. And last week, his allies sounded an alarm, claiming his whereabouts are unknown. They said that they have not had any contact with Navalny in the last 10 days. Now, the Navalny camp said that it is possible he has been moved to another prison to avoid any disruption in Putin's campaign.
Now, as the political stage sets up for the upcoming elections in March, Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared a bold vision for his nation's future.
Absolutely, his words have been resonating all across Russia. Speaking at a conference of the ruling United Russia Party, Putin asserted his commitment to making Russia sovereign and self-sufficient.
In his first campaign speech, he accused Western powers of attempting to disrupt Russia's economic and political stability. This as he seeks to extend his rule until at least 2030, which would be possible only if he wins the March polls.
Я приветствую делегатов и гостей 21-го съезда «Важна». Мы вместе преодолевали испытания крупнейшей ведущей политической партии. Такой авторитет, а значит, все второстепенное, лишнее, то, что нас разъединяет в интересах нашей единой страны, нашего великого. И благодарю вас за поддержку. Спасибо большое.
Vladimir Putin is set to pursue a fifth term in the Kremlin as an independent candidate, with no real opposition to take his place. He has also received unanimous support from various leaders of his party. This includes the Russian Prime Minister along with other top officials.
Сомнений в том, кто должен стоять во главе российского государства в этот весьма сложный период. За кем историческая правда, справедливость и поддержка большинства. В марте 2024 года наша партия сделает все, чтобы безоговорочную победу снова одержал действующий президент России Владимир Владимирович Путин.
Earlier on Saturday, a group of over 700 politicians, sports and cultural figures met in Moscow, showcasing their support for Putin. They advocated for his independent candidacy. Now, as per reports, Putin is not representing a party in the upcoming polls, even though he has its full support.
On the other hand, the 2024 vote is expected to take place amid a huge crackdown on disagreement in Russia. Putin's main political opponent, Alexei Navalny, is currently serving a 19-year prison sentence. But last week, his allies sounded an alarm, claiming that his whereabouts are now unknown. They said that they have not had any contact with Navalny in the last 10 days. The Navalny camp said that it is possible he has been moved to another prison to avoid any disruption in Putin's campaign.
Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin is all set to hold talks with Chinese Premier Li Qiang in Beijing. Now, the two countries have revamped economic and diplomatic cooperation in recent years. Ties have grown closer since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, despite Beijing's insistence it is neutral in the conflict. Now, according to the government of Russia, Mishustin was greeted upon arrival by Chinese Deputy Foreign Minister, Chinese Ambassador to Russia and Russian Ambassador to China. Chinese Foreign Ministry said Mishustin's visit is a part of a series of regular meetings with his counterpart, Li Qiang. The Russian Prime Minister travelled to Shanghai and Beijing in May, where he met with President Xi Jinping and signed a series of trade deals. His return to China comes 2 months after President Putin made a rare trip outside Russia to meet with Xi Jinping, and a month after a senior Chinese general was hosted in Moscow. The China-Russia relationship has seen major shifts since 1992. At the outset, China's population was greater than Russia's, and the two nations had very similar level of total GDP. These days, China's economy is estimated to be up to 10 times bigger than Russia's. Similarly, trade with Russia is not of major importance to China in terms of value. However, the high share of raw materials, including food, in Russian exports and the transfer of Russian military technology are of strategic importance to China. Since 2012, when Xi Jinping was first made Secretary General of the Chinese Communist Party, the relationship has evolved in the face of what both nations consider a rising threat from the West. Analysts say Beijing's response to Ukraine war, referred to as pro-Russia neutrality, has so far been much closer to Moscow than it was in the year 2014, when Crimea was annexed. Now, at the same time, developments since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 have increased Russia's dependency on China.
Now, Ukraine is staring at some very modest counteroffensive advances with just a few villages in the south and also in the east that are being recaptured after months of fighting with Western weapons against the entrenched Russian forces. Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has in fact vowed victory and has said during a meeting with defense officials on Tuesday that the society, that is the Ukrainian society, has in fact rallied behind him in the war effort. Now, Putin, remember, is running in an election that is expected to prolong his rule until 2030. Listen.
We are not going to give up our goals in this special military operation. Assessing the current situation on the ground, on the front line, we can confidently say that our troops have the initiative.
And since the offensive began in 2022, Kremlin has in fact outlawed any opposition to its assault on Ukraine, which is presented as an existential fight against the West. At the Defense Ministry meeting, Putin also accused the West of using Ukraine as a bit of a proxy to wage a war against Russia and has questioned the legitimacy of the Ukrainian nation. He also said that the Russian military equipment proved its superiority over Western weapons.
Where necessary, we improve our positions. The enemy is suffering heavy losses and has largely wasted its reserves, trying to show its real masters any result of its well-publicized so-called counter-offensive. By the way, the myth about the invulnerability of Western military equipment also collapsed.
The front line has hardly moved since the Russian retreat from Kherson in 2022, but Moscow's troops are on the offensive again. And Volodymyr Zelensky has said that there is no end in sight to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as fatigue is beginning to build in Kiev's allies. Zelensky also said that he has turned down a request from the military for now to mobilize as many as 500,000 more Ukrainians for the army. The unpopular proposal will, of course, hit his worsening poll ratings amongst the Ukrainians.
Their military position on the General Staff meeting was that they proposed to mobilize an additional 450,000 to 500,000 people. This is a very serious number, and I said that I need more arguments to support this idea. This is a question about people, about justice, about defense capabilities, and a financial question.
Друге – це питання справедливості, це питання.
Last week, Zelensky has embarked on a tour of Western nations to make the case for more military and political support. But he's failed to convince the US Congress to immediately approve about $60 billion in support. While in Brussels, the Hungarian leader, Viktor Orban, has blocked an aid package of nearly about $55 billion. The Ukrainian president has said, and I quote here, "I'm confident that the United States will not betray us." Now, Zelensky has in fact been facing growing discontent before Russia had invaded, before becoming the global face of Ukraine's resistance. He's again feeling political pressure at home. And recent polling has shown that the number of Ukrainians who trust Zelensky has in fact dropped to 62% compared to 84% just about a year ago. Back then, Kiev's forces were celebrating gains in East and in the South. Now, Ukraine at this moment is staring at some very modest counteroffensive advances, with just a few villages in the south and the east having been recaptured after months of fighting against the entrenched Russian forces. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has in fact vowed victory and has said during a meeting with the defense officials on Tuesday that society